What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Thoughts with Nick. Earlier this year, I shared my ideas on fear and shame. Today, I want to revisit that conversation, specifically adding a valuable caveat to my commentary on shame. Before getting into the details, as always, I'm going to get started with the quote. Today's quote comes from myself, and what I have to say is, "In the absence of respect, opinions fail to inspire consideration." If you don't get what I'm saying quite yet, throughout the remainder of this video, it'll become exceedingly clear because I feel like that quote really encapsulates exactly what I'm going to be discussing today. In order to fully understand all of what I'm going to say today, I do have to explain some of what I talked about previously, just so that you have the background knowledge and you get what I'm building on, so to speak. So to distill that into its most brief fashion, last time I talked about how I see a duality within shame, specifically that there are good and bad aspects of shame. The good aspects of shame are that it can be used as a societal control mechanism, in the sense that when someone is acting out of line or exhibiting immoral behavior, we call them out for those actions. And as a result, when they're in a position where they are liable to repeat that immoral action once again, they recollect how it felt when we cast shame upon them, and instead they act in accordance with the code of morals that we all abide by on a daily basis. When I say that, what I mean is we all have an intrinsic sense of right or wrong, right and wrong, I should say. So when someone acts out of line with that, we know that, thus we call them out and apply shame as a result of their actions that aren't in accordance with, what we live by, right? So that is the good aspect of shame, and that is why I see shame as beneficial in certain situations, because it can eliminate or reduce the proliferation of degenerate actions, right? So having said that, there is also kind of two aspects or two reasons why I think shame works so well to keep people from getting too far off of the right path, I guess you could say. I don't really know what else to call it. But anyway, so there's two aspects, right, that I see. The first one is respect. You have to respect the person who is casting the shame upon you for that shame to even have any meaning. If you don't respect the person who's trying to shame you, most likely that's not going to inspire any consideration. Exactly what I said in the quote. Their opinion of you is of no consequence to you because you don't respect them. I might be speaking too generally there, but I do think that for the most part, when respect is missing, the care or value that you ascribe to that person's opinion is severely diminished. Without getting too far off the topic, I do think that a key part of respect, at least in my conception of respect, is valuing what the other person has to say. So if there's a lack of respect, to me, that inherently means that you don't value what the other person has to say. Anyway, back to the subject. The second piece that I see as a requirement for the shame to be effective is a desire for assimilation or acceptance. When you're shamed, you're kind of placed in a temporary outgroup because you were called out, right? Maybe you're with your peers. You got like four buddies, you and three other guys, right? And you're this is the example that I used before, right? So you're being an asshole to the server, and your one buddy calls you out for that. So now those guys are kind of in their own separate in-group, and you're isolated in this out-group because you've been called out for your bad behavior. Nobody wants to feel like that. So of course, you're going to want to prevent against or limit those instances where you act that way that gets you, called out for your actions and put in timeout, if you will, right? So those are the two main reasons why I see shame as a very effective societal control mechanism. Well, that's why it works, right? That's why those are the prerequisites, I guess you could say, for shame to be effective. Let me restate that. In order for shame to be effective, the two prerequisites are respect for the person who is shaming you and a desire to be a part of an in-group. Having said that, this is exactly why I'm making this video, and this is exactly what the caveat is. Shame does not apply to the elite and ruling class, because not only do they not respect us, but they also have no desire to assimilate. They're in a class of their own. They feel no pressure as their own outgroup apart from the masses. They're totally fine with literally any opinion that could be cast upon them, because it doesn't change their status. So the question then becomes, how do we communicate with these people and, create some type of societal change within that class, when the way that societal change is, sometimes effectively executed is off the table? This is something that I've been wrestling with a little bit recently, and that's really why I came up with this idea in the first place, because I've been talking and thinking a lot about societal change. And in order for societal change to actually take place, the elites and the ruling class are going to have to change as well. So how can we get them to change when there is a fundamental lack of respect, which prevents our shame from ever having any meaning to them? This is, and it's obvious too, like it's obvious in light of recent events, without getting into the details too much, I'm sure you know what the fuck I'm talking about, right? All these people who have done all these despicable, disgusting, almost unfathomable things, and they don't even really acknowledge or give any type of half-assed apology. That's how you know they don't give a fuck about us or what we think, right? So how can change ever take place in that type of environment? So that kind of led me to think, okay, if these people, they don't respect us, they don't value our opinions, there's no desire for them to assimilate in any way, shape, or form, what do they care about, right? And it's pretty obvious. You don't have to think for that long about it. All they care about, well, one of the main things that they care about is money. So how can we speak to them? We can affect their money. We can affect their continued stream of wealth. So how can we do this? There's two main ways that I believe we can do this, but in order to even have those two options on the table, there is a hyper important prerequisite, which is unity and mass cooperation on a level that has quite possibly never been seen before. In order for anything communicating with the elites to be possible, there has to be a massive level of buy-in and a collective agreement that we're going to stand together united, and we're not going to deviate and break down, because any deviation would allow them to kind of like continue their machinations, if you will. It has to be a total united front, united effort that quite literally brings the system to a halt. There's no other way to communicate with them other than, economic and financial. So that's what it would have to be. We would have to realistically bring certain industries, certain businesses to their knees in order for them to hear what it is that we're saying, and in order to, influence real change. So if we were able to achieve that level of unity, and I don't want to say if, I should say if and when, but regardless, that is the crucial prerequisite. And I don't even know, unfortunately, how we would go about achieving something like that. What I will say, though, is I feel like of late there have been more issues that have kind of been able to unite the populace in a way that I haven't seen in a while. There's a lot of things going on right now that it seems like a lot of people are really on the same page about. So I do have hope that in our lifetime, it might be possible, it should be possible actually, to create, one of these movements like I'm going to be discussing here in just a second. We just have to continue to showcase the fact that despite the disagreements that we have, the things that we do agree upon are of much more importance. And we would be surprised at how much we have in common and how much we truly do agree upon if we chose to look and focus on those things instead of falling for the classic tactic of divide and conquer that keeps us, butting heads and freaking out and spazzing out at each other over these, in the grand scheme of things, somewhat minor issues that are extremely inflammatory and incendiary, right? So anyway, getting back to the methods that I think we could actually communicate with the elites and ruling class and, thus actually create change. The first one would be some type of mass strike. I'm going to keep it real. I don't see this happening. I don't see how it could work. And just to explain why and what it would entail. So a mass strike would mean, a huge percentage of the general population refusing to go to work. And that would be effective because it brings the entire country to a grinding halt. The reason it demands attention. It's something so obvious, it affects everyone. It's inescapable. And if it went on for a while, it would command some type of dramatic action. So anyway, that's pretty obvious to me why that would be effective. I don't know if I need to really delve into the details anymore, but the reasons why I don't think that could ever happen is because there's so many people that are living paycheck to paycheck. So how can you put someone like that? How can you ask someone in that position to, potentially not know when they're going to receive their next check? They're already living paycheck to paycheck, and now their financial future is completely uncertain. You can't really ask people to do that and expect them to wholeheartedly buy in and say, you know what, if this strike goes on for 6 months, I'm sticking with it the whole time. That could easily mean death for a great number of people unless there's some massive subsidy backing it, which, is really the only way that I could see it being effective. If there is some massive subsidy for those striking to ensure that, the strike can continue and people aren't going to be starving to death. Because the secondary aspect of why I don't really see it working out is because, yes, strikes can be protected under certain circumstances, but of course, the way that things go, I'm sure that even if everything was tried to be done by the books and followed in accordance to make sure, this strike could be protected, if it actually started going right, I feel like there would be some way to revoke that thing and be like, nah, sorry, your strike has now been deemed unconstitutional, whatever. Something that would derail it. And the reason that I say that is if a strike is approved, or whatever the right word is, or protected, that's what it is, then I believe that the jobs are protected as well. You're not able to just be fired and cut loose, because that is exactly what I see happening if there was a mass strike. Companies would just say, all right, fuck you, bye, and fire the strikers, just hire more people to fill in those positions. If someone could just get hired to fill in for you immediately, then your job, you're not going to want to go on strike either, because you'll just lose your job and be replaced. There's a lot of incentives not to strike because of, the precarious nature of employment and the necessity of getting paid to continue staying alive. Unfortunately, that's the world that we live in, right? So anyway, that's one of the first ways that I think we can communicate with the elites, affecting their financials by refusing to produce in the market whatever said production is. It doesn't necessarily have to be a physical good. It could be something else, some type of service, who knows what. But by refusing to contribute to the increase of supply, that would hurt their returns. And then secondarily, the other way, as I just mentioned there, limiting the supply or preventing the increase of supply, the other aspect is to refuse to consume the existing demand, to boycott. So this obviously would be a major detriment, because they have all this existing product out there in the market requiring consumption in order for them to make a profit or to even get any type of return at all on the materials or service that they provided. So if those products are just sitting out there in the market and they're not getting any money for that should be an issue for them. That should communicate something. Of course, you know, they're still going to be massively wealthy, right? But they're not going to see the continued increase of said wealth. So anyway, I think a boycott is less painful to the everyday individual because it might be a little more expensive. You might have to buy things that aren't your normal, right? But it doesn't involve you actually sacrificing your livelihood potentially for something that might never even benefit you. You could, though, I think it's more reasonable to ask people to maybe increase their expenses a little bit here and there to boycott a product from someone or some company that as a country we find their actions to be morally reprehensible, right? So I do think a boycott would be pretty effective. Once again, arranging it, I don't know exactly how to do that, but I do think that if there was a mass boycott where literally everyone in the country, or like imagine 80% of the country says, you know what, nah, I'm done with that. I'm not buying anything from this company. I don't want to say a company. I'm kind of blanking, honestly. But regardless, you get the point. 80+% of the country says, I'm not buying anything from your company. That's going to cause a major reaction from the company and the individuals running it. You know, there's going to be a major panic, probably a mass sell-off of the stock. You know, that's serious. That's a really serious thing. So anyway, for the company, you know, not for like, not in the grand scheme of life and death per se, but for the company, that's a very serious matter. So those are kind of the two things that I think would really allow us to communicate our severe disappointment with the actions of the elite and ruling class without resorting to violence, because for me, that's off the table. We have to find other ways to communicate. And the reason why I say that, which I'll explain further in a later video, is that I believe that the means are the end. So if we have a violent means, of course, the end is also going to be violent. It's one and the same, right? So anyway, moving forward, I want to just briefly discuss a couple examples that I see. So one person whose actions have come to light and been morally bankrupt. I can't even begin to like explain the depravity, but anyway, it's Bill Gates. You know, most likely some of you out there were already aware of how heinous he is. You know, I already, not to like pat myself on the back, but I was already well in the know before all of this new information came to light. So regardless, how could we communicate with somebody like that and say, you are a fucked up individual. I refuse to give you any more money or contribute to the continued success of you or anything that you are related to, right? So I'm pretty sure I could be, he's not running Microsoft anymore, I don't think. But regardless, a mass boycott on Microsoft. Imagine if 80% of the country switched to Linux instead of Windows, right? Like, imagine how many countries in this company run on Windows and use Microsoft products. I don't know the number. I probably should have looked it up, but I'm going to guess it's probably well into the hundreds of millions, like probably over 150 million if I had to guess, at least just domestically, right? So that would be major if like 80% of that consumer base said, yeah, I'm out of here. I'm done. Good luck without me. That would be big. That would be huge. So that's just one example. You know, of course, there's other stuff that Gates does, but that would show. And the stocks did take a hit. Microsoft did take a pretty big hit when some of that information came to light. So you can see, like, when the general sentiment is in a certain place, it does exhibit an effect. So imagine if there was a follow through there. Imagine if there was an actual action following the sentiment. There could have been a dramatic effect created, but the cause kind of died out, right? So a large boycott, of course, it's difficult. It would be very difficult to migrate to an entire new operating system. You know, I don't want to act like that's some easy thing to do. It's certainly not, but it would absolutely send a message of loud and clear. So, you know, that's just one thing that, while it's not the easiest thing, it's something that is certainly on the table, in my opinion. I don't know how you would get buy-in across industry, across corporations, you know, but that's not what I'm here to discuss, thankfully. So anyway, another example that I see right now is within media. If you look at, there's one group or one family, actually, well, there's a couple, but the one that I'm thinking of right now is the Ellisons. They have been a part of all of these mergers so that they own a shitload of the media. And if you don't want their bias being pushed to you, you know, all you have to do is turn off the TV. It's not that hard. So if all of us, like, I think between some of their services, just to name a few of them, you know, one of the big things within the past year or so, I would say, is that they own the US portion of TikTok, however that works. They own Paramount, Skydance. Pretty sure that they just bought Warner Brothers. I'm sure there's other, like, even within, when I say like Paramount and Warner Brothers, like, there's all those things within those, like CNN, CBS. Those are just a couple of news ones that are coming to mind right off the top of my head. But there's like whole networks within those media corporations, you know, within, I don't know if it's Paramount or Warner Brothers. I think it's Warner. Yeah, it's got to be Warner Brothers. Is HBO. Like, there's all these things. It's just all of these platforms that this one family is running. And as I spoke about previously, when information is being distributed from such a select few, it's inherently problematic because, you know, like it or not, whether you intend to or not, you're going to be injecting your bias in the product you provide. Even in this video, even in my channel, my bias is rampant throughout. You know, that's just the nature of things. When you produce something, your touch is inextricably a part of it. It can't be separated, the creator from the creation, for better or worse, right? So anyway, my point there is, between all of the services that they rule over, they have hundreds of millions of subscribers and subscriptions to these platforms. So just like in the Microsoft situation, if everyone, or if like 80% of the people canceled their subscriptions to these streaming sites or just deleted TikTok off of their phone, that would send a huge message, especially something like TikTok. Imagine that, how ingrained that is in life today for so many people. If 100 million people deleted TikTok on the same day, that's sending the signal loud and clear. Doesn't get much more obvious than that, what you're trying to communicate, at least in my opinion. I am not happy with you. So, you know, just to give a few examples, there you go. Two people, or one person and then one family, who have an undue amount of power within this country due to their financial situation, their extreme wealth. And to me, and I think probably a lot of people would agree on this, just because you have wealth doesn't mean you should automatically have power. And these wealthy people buy up things like the media groups and streaming services. They buy up things that give them power and give them control over aspects of our lives. So we have to be able to communicate with them in a way that they actually understand, and in a way that actually affects them, because the means that we're used to, it's obvious, mean nothing to them. I don't really have too much else to add today. Like I said, I just wanted to add a layer of nuance and an important caveat to my previous commentary on shame, because in order to change the world, the people in charge of it are going to have to change too. And unfortunately, right now, that is a financial elite that has turned into a ruling class. And I don't necessarily have a solution on how to change that. So my solution by proxy is to change the nature and the behavior of those in that financial ruling class. And as I said, the main way that I believe this can be achieved is through financial means, affecting their continued streams of revenue, because you can't really affect as much what they have currently unless, for example, much of it is tied up in stocks of companies that they own or are affiliated with. Then you could damage their holdings by plunging the stocks through things like boycotts or mass strikes, which, once again, as I mentioned, I see boycotts being the least painful option out of these two for the majority of people. So anyway, actually going about something like a mass strike or a boycott, that is the next step, which I'm going to have to do some thinking and reflection on, because I think that it would be really powerful to see something like that today in this day and age, where at times things can feel very divided, despite like I said earlier, the unity that I'm beginning to see today. It can feel very difficult to imagine everyone coming together and rallying around something like a boycott, but I do believe it's well on the table, and the time is now to at least give it a try. Even if it doesn't work the first time, who the fuck cares? You have to try and figure out what some of the shortcomings are. Like, I don't know. I just think it's well beyond time to begin to try to affect change by means that are peaceful, but also communicate the message in a clear and non-misinterpretable fashion. So anyway, once again, this time I'm actually going to wrap up with the quote as well. So like I said before, in the absence of respect, opinions fail to inspire consideration. If it wasn't clear what that meant before, since the elites and the financial ruling class don't respect us, our opinions of them and the shame that we try to cast upon them elicits no consideration on their part. They don't think twice about it, and they never will. So we have to find another way to communicate our dissatisfaction with the way that they are doing things. All right, thank you for tuning in as always, and let me know what you think. Peace.